Alright, so for this afternoon's game, we're just going for a throw it all down cavalry battle. So we've got a French light cavalry division on the table here. 6 regiments, 2 of hussars, 2 of lancers and 2 of chasseurs. We've got a dragoon brigade and 3 cuirassier regiments. And so we've got 4 brigades on the French side. I think we'll do it as 4 brigades and 5 brigades possibly. 5 brigades on the French side, and they're facing 3 brigades of British. So we've got 3 regiments of Life Guards and the heavy regiment of British Dragoons with the Scots Greys and Heavy Dragoon regiment, and then we've got a light cavalry regiment. So the light cavalry regiment's got British Light Dragoons, British Hussars and more British Light Dragoons, Heavy Dragoons, Scots Greys, a Horse Artillery Battery, and then the 3 regiments of Guards Cavalry. Facing off against those, 3 regiments of cuirassiers, led by Kellerman and Ney, with an attached horse artillery battery and supported by 2 regiments of dragoons, and then a massive light cavalry division on the flank. First chasseurs, 6th chasseurs, 5th and 6th lancers and hussars. Alright, we'll roll for initiative and see how this game goes. Alright, so the French unfortunately rolled 3 ones for their activation, so they only got 2 ADCs, and unfortunately as a result their dragoon regiment has gone hesitant, and the lancer regiment in that large light cavalry formation has gone hesitant. All brigades for the Allies didn't need any of their rerolls, they all went active. So for initiative, it's 6 all, but the French get a -2 modifier for their hesitant brigades, so the Allies get to move first. Let's see what they'll do. All right, nothing too sophisticated for the Allies. The Guards Cavalry have moved up to this hedge line in the middle of the table, and broadly all of the average Allied cavalry units have moved forward to try and give themselves some manoeuvre space and not be forced off the table by French charges. So that's it for the Allies. Let's see how the French respond. All right, so starting on the right flank, the veteran 2 regiments of veteran cuirassiers, including the large regiment in the centre, have again moved up to close the distance on the Allies. And I think it's the 11th cuirassiers, they're the ones without the cuirass. So you can see those guys have just got greatcoats rolled over them. And they've moved to try and do a flanking attack, potentially in due course, against the Guards Cavalry. Otherwise, the Dragoons are pinned to their back line, and the Chasseurs have started to try and move around the flank of the British Lights, and the Hussars in the distance have formed into column, try and give them a bit more manoeuvrability and try and potentially get around the hesitant Lancers who are pinning them. Alright, so first thing to do will be some firing from the British Horse Artillery. So they're going against the cuirassiers in the centre. Let's see how we do. We roll a 4. That won't be anything, I don't believe. At effective range, a 4 is no impact. Not a great first shot from the British Horse Artillery. Right, the French Horse Artillery will open fire against the Scots Greys. Let's see what they do. Not much better roll. They roll a 6. We'll check that. That probably is also at effective range. It'll be 1 casualty if it's at effective range, or half a casualty if it's at long range. And then finally, the other Horse Artillery Battery will open up against these light dragoons. Not a great set of firing, so only 1 casualty there, as that one will definitely be at effective range. Right, we'll mark up those casualties and get on with turn 2. I just thought I'd show you really terrible roll for ADC activation. From 9 dice, we only have 2 active ADCs. We'll probably give those as a reroll to the Life Guard for the Allies and to the Cuirassiers for the French as our key combat units. So we'll get on with activation and I'll show you the initiative roll. Clearly the French light cavalry unit really doesn't know why it's been called into this battle. It should be off scouting. So unfortunately the Chasseurs Brigade this time has gone hesitant. The Lancers are active, but then the Hussars in support are also hesitant. The Dragoons have stayed hesitant. But fortunately for the French, their cuirassiers are active. For the Allies, all are active. So roll for initiative, this will be -3 off the French roll. Both sides now roll a 9, so the Allies again have initiative. Alright, so there was really never any doubt, was there? This is the British cavalry. They do have a target in front of them, so they have yelled the order charge, and in they've gone. So we've got the British Life Guards here charging the cuirassiers. The Horse Guards here have charged the central large unit of cuirassiers, and they've been supported by this other Life Guards unit. So we'll see how they do. They're trying to break the French in the centre, and they're ignoring their flanks. We'll see how that does for them. They might have a painful response if the French can survive this initial charge. Over here in the centre, given this brigade was hesitant, this was probably the best opportunity for the British cavalry to charge without taking too much artillery fire. So the Scots Greys have charged into the stationary dragoons. The British Horse Guards or heavy cavalry, heavy dragoons have charged in. They had to take 1 extra casualty for moving at full speed across the hedge. So they took 1 disruption as they did that. And over here on the flank, given that the chasseurs again were hesitant, the British light dragoons and the hussars have charged their chasseur opponents, and they're supported by this second unit of light dragoons. Right, let's see how these charges go. We'll probably start with the light cavalry. For the British cavalry, these light dragoons on this end are regulars. The chasseurs we're deeming are as regulars, and then the hussars and the small unit of light dragoons we're treating both as veterans. So on this one, the Allies get +2, 1 because the French brigade is hesitant, and 1 because the quality of their mounts is better. And and there's no advantage, I don't think, for being a large unit. Because they're not double my frontage. But the French will get the advantage of a supporting reroll because they are a large unit, and you can use your second rank effectively to provide you that support. Alright, so the Allies roll a 10, +2 makes a 12. The French will use their second roll of support to reroll that 2 to get to a 3. So that's a 9 against a 12, so that's a +3 result for cavalry versus cavalry. The attackers melee with Elan, and those chasseurs melee unformed. Okay, so again in the second combat, this will be +3, the Allies, same modifiers, but they are a veteran unit. The French get a reroll because of their second rank, because they are a large unit. The Allies get a reroll because of the supporting light dragoons. Let's see how we do. Allies get a 9, so we'll both keep the 6s. The French will reroll their 1 to a 2. The Allies, I think, will keep their 3. So that takes it to 12, 8. So they've won by 4. Again, that'll be a melee with Elan. Alright, rolling for the British Heavy Dragoons. Again, this will be at +3. Again, same modifiers as they are veteran and better quality horses. And the French. The French are hesitant. So the Allies roll an 8. They don't have a reroll. The French roll a 10. So at +3, that becomes a win by 1. So again, that would just be a straight melee in this one. I think that's it. No rerolls. The French won't reroll their 4. So we go into melee there. And now we'll roll the Scots Greys. This will be at a +2 for the Scots Greys, but the French are a large brigade, so they do get a reroll. The French roll 6. They will reroll that 1. The French go to a 9. The Allies are on an 8. They get a +2 modifier, so that takes them to a 10. So again, they win by 1. So again, 2 straight melees here in the centre. Alright, so both of these combats will be +1 to the British in this first combat. Both regular size units, so no re-rolls. So +1 to the British. The British roll a 6, the French roll an 8. So that becomes a 7 and against 8. So we go into melee. Right, coming to the second combat. Right, again, +1 to the allies, and both sides get a reroll on this one. Terrible roll for the British. They take their reroll, they get a 5. The French won't reroll theirs, so theirs is a 9. So 5 against a 9 becomes a 6 against a 9, so that's a -3. So the attacker melees unformed, and the defender countercharges and melees with Elan. So clearly the British stumbled as they tried to go over that fence, too close to the cuirassiers, who took the opportunity of countercharging in. Let's see how they do as we move on to firing and then melees. Alright, so with the end of movement, the French cuirassiers on the flank were not able to wheel round and countercharge. You have to do your wheel with your first d6 of movement, and going over that hedge and the width of this unit meant they couldn't bring themselves into line with the flank of the British cavalry unit that had charged the cuirassiers in the centre here, so they've simply taken the opportunity to come round on their flank and position themselves well for next turn. Otherwise, our guns, with a lack of targets as all the cavalry are charging in, simply have been engaged in some desultory artillery fire, counter battery fire, and 1 casualty was taken on that French artillery battery in the centre. Alright, let's start with the hand-to-hand combat. This looks like a crunch piece. We'll come to that last. Let's start with the light cavalry on the left flank. Okay, so this first combat, the Allies will simply have 1 more dice than the French because they're meleeing with Elan. The French large size of their unit offsets their unformed status. Alright, that looks like 3 casualties to the Allies, 4 casualties inflicted by the French. So the French have won by 1 in a cavalry versus cavalry combat. The losers retreat, and the French take the ground. All right, we'll mark that up. Okay, so the second combat should be far more advantageous to the British, as they've got 2 units engaged. That's the British casualty dice. They throw absolutely terribly. They only caused, that was a 2, 4 casualties out of that. Let's see how the French respond. Well, they caused 3. So they only just lose that combat. They're forced to retreat, and the Allies take the ground. Okay, so these 2 combats are straight roll-offs. In the first one, the Allies have the slight advantage, as they're veterans against regular French dragoons. Can the Allies roll any better? They do slightly better this time. They cause 4 casualties on the French, who are forced off table, and indeed on a loss of 2, they are retreat, and the Allies return to their own lines. Alright, we'll mark up those casualties, and the French dragoons are the first unit forced off the table. Alright, for the second combat, it was straight roll off, the greater size of the French offset by the veteran status of the Allies. So the Allies do 3 casualties, the French only do 1, a mirror result. So the Allies fall back to their own lines, and the dragoons, a 2nd Dragoon Regiment, is forced from the table, and the 1st French Brigade is lost. Okay, so in this combat the Allies have a small advantage because they are elite and a morale grade better. Both are heavy cavalry, so expect some high casualties from this. Alright, looks like the Allies have done well, astoundingly well. That is 7 casualties on the French. The French have only caused 3 in return, so they've won by more than 4. So that unit of cuirassiers routs, and the British heavy cavalry take the ground. Alright, this one is going to be another tough ask for the French. The British hugely benefit from attacking with 2 units. So each unit, although it's only small, so it starts with 5 dice, it loses 1 for being unformed, it loses 1 for being formed, it goes down to 3. But it is heavy cavalry, which takes it up to 4. It is a morale grade higher than the French, takes it up to a 5, and it's elite, which takes it up to 6. So both of those get 6 dice. The French start with 5, they add 1 for heavy cavalry, and they add 1 for veteran. So let's see what the French do. Wow, that's a pretty good roll. They cause 5 casualties. Let's see how the Allies do. Again, that looks pretty good. 5, 6, 7. So they win by 2. So they will cause the French cavalry to retreat, and they return to their own lines. Probably quite a good move for those British cavalry. Okay, so clearly a message for all viewers there. That was a terrible deployment by the French. And indeed probably by the Allies. Having your cavalry in one long string is not great. You need units to go in relays, obviously, and have some units to fall back behind if you get a retreat result. So those two French cavalry units, one routed off the table, the other one retreated off the table. If they'd had a support, they'd at least have been able to stop behind that support and would have had a chance to reform. As it is, the French cavalry have lost 4 heavy regiments, although clearly the dragoons, being stuck on the table edge, having been hesitant, really had no other option. Sort of use that dragoon division as a reserve. So there will be a falter test on this remaining French brigade, and it is certainly a broken brigade now. We'll have a tough time exploiting the unformed British heavy cavalry who are now here near their baseline. Looks pretty much all over for the French, especially as they've been thrown back by the cavalry on this flank, but we will go on and we'll see what happens as we play turn 3. Alright, some reasonable results in turn 3. So the French cavalry is all active on this left flank, and fortunately for the cuirassiers, I don't know whether it's fortunately, but they did get an obey orders check, so they can stay on the table and active. All the Allies, British cavalry is active, and the British have initiative, rolling a 10 to a 6. Right, we'll start with any British charges, then it'll be French charges. Alright, so with the intention of not allowing the French the opportunity to deploy, we continue to try and push them back, so the 2 British light regiments have charged the French lancers, see what they can do there. And in a opportunity to try and reverse fortunes, the cuirassiers who had crossed the hedge line up there have charged the reforming British lifeguards, see what they can do, see whether they can break that unformed unit and get some element of revenge. Right, let's see how the charges go in turn 3. Okay, so this will be +1 to the hussars, possibly +2 to the hussars because they are veterans. And wow, that's another great result for the Allies. They look like they're going to win the day here. That's a 12, so that's a destiny test. And they get a +2, that takes them up to a 14, plays a 7. So they've won by more than 6. The French do get a reroll because they do have supports to the rear. Okay, a 7, so that is no help. They have lost by 6. So that's victory. So the defenders rout. They have got no room to reform, so they will disappear off table, and the cavalry can charge on. Alright, so let's see how we do. First we've got a destiny test on the British for passing it. Wow, we get another double 6. So that's a falter test on the opposing unit, so that would be on the lancers, so they will have to take a falter test next turn. And that's it. Then we get to charge on, which we do, and we got a 14, which takes us both into into the chasseurs regiment that's retreating. So I think they automatically fall back because they haven't had a chance to. No, they did they rally last time? When did they fall back? They fell back from combat in the last turns, yeah, so they haven't had their turn stationary to reform yet. So they are still retreating, but they did pass their rally test, so I'm wrong. They are unformed, but they did pass their brigade activation test. So they are simply unformed when they're hit by the charging on hussars. Let's see how they do in this next round of combat that automatically follows the first. Okay, so if we beat the chasseurs, the British are on a +3 net adjustment. They have gone unformed because British cavalry always do when they charge on. But this will be a test at +3, and it'll be at it'll be simply at +3 against the chasseurs, and it would also be at +3 against the hussars. So let's roll the first roll against the hussars. Sorry, chasseurs. +3 makes that a 6 versus a 5. So that's not a breakthrough or anything like that. That's simply a win by 1. So they will go into combat with the chasseurs. All right, that's the end of that charge. We'll then come back and do the light dragoon. Okay, so in this one against the lancers, it's at +2 to the British. Wow, the lancers do well. They roll a 10. They're not going to re-roll for their supports. And actually they couldn't have re-rolled because the supports are from a different brigade. So the Allies add 2, so the British add 2, they go to 8. So this is a result of -2. So that will be a straightforward melee. All right, we'll come back and do that melee in the melee phase. All right, down here's a straight roll off. The French get the advantage of hitting the Allies unformed, but the British are elite and the French here are only regulars. French roll an 8, Allies roll a 5, so that's a +3. So they will melee with Elan, and the British Lifeguards continue to melee unformed. All right, we'll now do the rest of the movement, and then we'll be on with firing and combat. Sorry, I just made a mistake on that one. Realised we had a support here, so we got a support re-roll. I rolled a 3, which goes down to a 2. That means that's a win for the French by 2. So that's not meleeing with Elan, just be a straightforward melee here. But the British will remain unformed. All right, on with normal movement. All right, lots of dice in this one, as both sides are heavy cavalry. So the French get 7 dice, but unfortunately only cause 2 casualties. Allies start with 5. They lose 1 for being unformed. They gain 1 for being elite. They gain 2 for being heavy cavalry, and they gain 2 for being 2 morale grades higher. So can they beat 2? Not a great roll, but they roll 4. That will cause the cuirassiers to rout. The brigade is already broken, so that brigade will fail and leave the table. That's it. The French heavy cavalry division has been destroyed. Right, doing the combat with the Hussars. They start with 5 dice. They gain 1 for veteran, takes them up to 6, but lose 1 for being unformed. Yep, just 1, so they are on 5. The French start with 5. They gain 1 for being a large brigade, lose 1 for being unformed, and lose 1 for 4 casualties. So a slight advantage to the British Hussars. Let's see how they do. They cause 2 casualties, as do the French. They got the opportunity to fight on. Right, in this combat, actually the French have the advantage, so the British are veterans, but they are a small unit, and the Lancers get a bonus dice of 1 for fighting against cavalry. Let's see how we do. Okay, it does look like the British's day. They've caused 4 casualties, the French have only caused 3. So the British light cavalry have beaten those Lancers. They've beaten them by 1, so the Lancers have to retreat, and they'll have to retreat off table, and light cavalry can take the ground. We're going to make this the last turn of the game. So the French chasseurs have charged in against the British light dragoons, and the French hussars are trying to charge in here against the British light dragoons. Otherwise, I've already done the movement for the other units. The remaining units have formed up, and the British heavy cavalry is starting to arrive on the flank of the French. So with the heavy cavalry coming in, and indeed the lifeguards available to form up and come across as well, it's all over the French light cavalry. So they'll do these last charges to try and drive off the British light cavalry brigade, see if they concede in that, and then they'll retire from the field. Right, let's do these last 2 charges. So down here we have a straight melee, and with the hussars, you've got a melee with Elan. We'll just do those combats. Due to the last large unit status of the French and the fact that this British light dragoon unit has already taken casualties, French have a good advantage on this one. They don't roll too well. They roll a double 6 though, so they cause 2 casualties, and they will force the British light dragoons to retreat off the table. A small victory there for the French. Right, fighting with the French hussars, they get a small bonus because they're a regular unit. The British light dragoons, although veterans, are unformed, a small unit, and have taken 4 casualties, but the British win that one. 3 casualties to the French 2. They will force the French hussars to retreat off the table. Right, that's it, that's the end of the game. So some small recompense for the French. They have at least driven 1 British light dragoon regiment off the table, but the hussars and the other British light dragoons are still in play and pinning the remnants of the French light cavalry regiment off the table edge. That regiment is down to 3 units from 6, so this 3 unit strong British unit performed remarkably well. They were veterans going against regular troops, but great game by them. The British heavy cavalry did well, drove those dragoons off the table earlier in the game, and then the British elite guards drove off the cuirassiers. So I really enjoyed that game. Always love cavalry games. Great fun, really fast moving, lots of action. Didn't get my tactics right. Should have had some waves, although clearly that didn't work over here with the French light cavalry. Never quite got enough space to deploy because the British were on them too quickly, and they weren't able to use that falling back behind supports effectively because they were always pinned against that table edge. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this game. Something a bit different, and I'll see you all again next time. Cheers.